Cool. Okay. Zachary's got a good question. I'm going to start jumping into stuff. And so I'm assuming you can all see my screen. And I'm going to exit out of this little slide deck here. And I'm going to pop over into Figma. And we're going to look at some cool stuff here. So as a tiny bit of background, I'm going to zoom way out. And maybe I'm going to open up a builder really quickly. As a tiny bit of background, Builder is essentially a bridge between your code and your designs. And so you can use Builder as a headless CMS to allow your teams who are not developers to drag and drop and produce new content for your site that gets to be published without having to deploy or make code updates just because you want to change the layout of your components or bring a new design onto your homepage or whatever that is. Anything in Builder can be generated as code. So when we show you these features of generating with AI, with importing with AI, all of those things can either be published through our API, which is an integration, or just download it as code and work that into your code base and make changes. I'll start with some basic demos and ask your questions, and we'll focus on the areas that you all find most interesting and worth diving into deeper. First question, this is a good one. Is this being recorded? Yes, it is. And I think we will follow up with recording and probably post it to YouTube as well. So we'll do that. We can have that in a follow-up. I'll mark that as answered. Also a reminder too, the questions of the Q&A, you all can upvote. So I'll try and go in most upvoted order as well if we get a lot. But let's start showing some cool stuff and keep wailing on the chat because I love seeing where everybody's kind of coming in from. So very, very common situation. You've got some beautiful design. In fact, actually, I'm going to go over to one more set of designs here. Oops. Of course, I'm clicking on the wrong things. Oh, goodness. There we go. There we go. So I've got a whole bunch of designs here, and day to day, if you're a developer or if you're on, not a developer, you're a designer marketer, you've got all kinds of stuff that you need to go from just design to live. Now, the tricky part is, as you all might know, design to code has been something that people have wanted forever, right? And there's a whole bunch of products that make some type of claim to do some type of design to code. In fact, funny enough, Builder had one for a long time too. We were one of the top Figma plugins for design to code, even before Visual Copilot. And I'll admit, I thought that implementation kind of sucked. The reality of design to code is it's got some really difficult challenges in it. And people usually take one of two approaches. Approach one is requiring a very sophisticated pre-setup of your design, a way where you have to use auto layout for every layer. That's what we required, or a naming structure or a grouping structure, something that you'd have to do all kinds of advanced work. And that just kind of sucks. We hated that we required that, and people really just want to take their designs and turn them to code. The second issue you find in any other design to code solution is if it doesn't make you do all that tedious setup, it's going to import as is from the design, which means it's not going to be responsive. So I can take this random design that we had or this one instead. And then, if I make adjustments here, like I resize this board, it's not responsive, right? Nothing in here is actually knows how to react to different sizes. Now, with Visual Copilot, which all you need is to install our extension. So I'll go over here, build.io, Visual. It's actually just a Figma plugin. I don't think we actually call the plugin itself Visual Copilot. It's more of a feature of the plugin. But all you need to do is download this plugin. Technically, you just Figma switched from like this model where you download things into this model where you just kind of run them. So anyway, you can find it here and you can open it in your Figma or open it in a test file. All you got to do is use this plugin. And I'll start with the basics that maybe you all have seen, but let's just start from the beginning. So anything you have in Figma, you can highlight. We can open the plugin. I like to hit Command/ and just type in builder.io. For whatever reason, the image always seems to be broken here. I think that's just a very minor Figma bug. And then we can launch the plugin. The plugin, unsurprisingly, just has one big button, generate code. So if I just want to take this, or maybe I'll take just this whole hero as one, and we can click that to generate that to code. This will launch into the Builder visual editor. And there we go. So we have this. Now, keep in mind, the AI is not perfect. You might want to make some adjustments. For example, I want a little bit of space here. So I can go in and I can add a little bit of margin at the top here if I like, maybe a little bit margin on the sides. We can also look at some of the other responsive dimensions like, oh, there's no max width here. Maybe I do want to have it kind of clipped to a max width. So you can go in here and make any changes you want in the visual editor. So maybe let's give this like a 1500 pixel max width. And if it goes past that, there we go. And last thing, let's center it. And maybe we'll make the width always fill. There we go. That looks much nicer. We've got this in a pretty nice looking state. Last nitpick I have is a little padding on each side. So I'm going to add that. And beautiful. Now, keep in mind, this design had no responsiveness built into it. What our AI will do is make a bunch of educated guesses. And what you'll want to do is make any final tweaks. So just now, this kind of pulled us in, and I'm feeling good about the responsive details. Note that you can also make changes here. Like, for example, maybe we just don't want these links on a small size. I'm just going to delete it. Anything you edit on a small screen size, we'll use a breakpoint to just be specific to that screen size and smaller. And now the most important part, we want to get code. Now, there is a way to just publish this to your website if you integrate our API, which is cool. But let's go ahead and just grab the code. So here's what we call our fast code. Fast code has an unlimited context window size, but you'll notice a couple things with the fast code. The first one is, maybe I'll zoom in a little bit on this. The first one is this is div soup. It's div. That's not ideal. The second one is if you use something other than Tailwind. Now we support tons of different frameworks here, and we support multiple different styling options. Let's say we're choosing something else. Let's say we're choosing Vue and CSS. The other thing you can notice is the class names, div 12, div 13. We don't want that. The way this works, and I actually might have a slide I can find and pull up for this, but the way this works is we actually use a whole chain of models in a compiler. So we have one AI model specifically around figuring out what inside of your design should be an image. As you all know, when you're developing out something from a design, one of the first things you need to do is figure out what should be discrete images and export those. For instance, this is made up of a million different layers. In this case, all these really should be one image. And we have a custom trained AI model just to identify those, which of these should be their own discrete images. Now, one thing I want to cover in this webinar is best practices. Let's say the AI got something wrong. It's always possible AI gets something wrong. I don't think I've ever seen somebody ask ChatGPT anything they want and always get right answers. That should be the expectation. That's normal. Get up Copilot will autocomplete something. It's guessing. When it's right, that rules. When it's not, we can fix it a lot easier in many cases than having to think through the problem from scratch, write all the code from scratch. And honestly, we're wrong a lot too. So you know it. We're just human. And so one thing you can do is if you ever find the AI is getting the image detection wrong, all you need to do as an interesting best practice is come in here. Let's group it. Grouping actually helps inform the AI of what are kind of logical units. And another really good trick you can do is actually set an export setting for this. So just by clicking the plus on export, I've actually identified that, okay, because this is configured to be exportable, that also tells our AI, hey, this is a discrete image right here. Leave it be. Don't try and do any other magic or assumptions. So once we do that and we know what's an image, the next step and the really hard step, I also have a YouTube video describing kind of how the AI training works for the image detection. The other tough step is to break everything into essentially rows and columns. To make this responsive, we need to know that this should be one big row with probably 3 groups inside. This would be a flex row. This would be a flex column, all these things sitting vertical, etc. That's again where if you use features like auto layout, let's say, for instance, we had trouble, this was not working as expected. We can go in here and group it. And the way auto layout works, we'd actually have to group this too. And we can use auto layout. Auto layout's not just useful for if you want to give hints to the AI, but it's also useful if you want to have very precise control over the output here. So if I go into auto layout, and you'll see when you trigger auto layout, it's going to make some guesses. And it looks like I kind of missed this within this group. So auto layout's a responsive system, so it's a little bit trickier to use than just normal absolute position editing. Let me go back, and I want to fix one of these groupings really quickly first. So these and this, I want this to also be in this group. Perfect. Now, if I go back to this group and add auto layout, there we go, looks better. And so another thing we could do too, if we want, we can get auto layout here. Now, auto layout's nice because it gives you a lot of control. So see how the guess on auto layout didn't do amazing there? And we can sort of change the properties here of how these things align. That's looking a little bit better. Maybe I'll shrink up the padding here. This is how, if you're like, hey, I know exactly what I want out of my design, even broken down to responsiveness, you can go and do that in great detail. Now, in my case, though, I didn't do any of that. And we still did surprisingly good. And we can look at this on both desktop and mobile. This is pretty dang accurate. In fact, maybe I'll even delete that too. And so going back to the code you saw before, now I can select whatever I want and get code for the specific pieces. When you're bringing this into your code base, if you're importing large sections, you probably don't want all the code at once. So in this case, I don't think you want one component that represents both your header and navigation and this hero. You probably want 2 different things. So keep in mind, you want to select what you want to export and export it. And now with all that said, so the AI mentions the breakdown to images and break into responsive layout. generates essentially a JSON format that represents what the total hierarchical information is from that Figma design. And we pull in all the CSS properties derived from the Figma design. Then we generate code, and that uses a project called Mitosis. So if there's ever anything in this export that you want a certain CSS framework to be supported, like StyleX, but StyleX just came out, so AI and LLMs will not be trained on it. All you need to do is actually add support for that in Mitosis, and anything Mitosis supports can run through the Visual Copilot output really nicely. And it's surprisingly easy. I can set up a separate session or video potentially on that, but integrating to the code generation, Mitosis is a project for essentially generating code across many frameworks. So I'll give you a peek at what it looks like. It can take code both from a JSX format, as well as a Svelte format, as well as visual formats like you'll see with Builder, and it can generate out surprisingly good code across a wide variety of frameworks. So whatever I change, let's make this color blue, let's make the name John, that will update across the different outputs, including native outputs and all kinds of other wild stuff. There's a lot of different types of outputs here, more than you probably potentially would expect. And there's sub options too, like the version of view that you're using, the options API versus composition API, React with different state formats, different styling formats, all this good stuff. So what you're seeing in this code output right here is the Mitosis output. Mitosis is capable of generating quite high quality code with one exception. It will not know what's the correct semantic tags to use are, because that requires context and another layer of AI, and it won't know what class names are best. And so that's where you want to use the high quality code output. And here you'll see a big change. Two big things you'll see. One is you see better naming. Now, the AI is not always perfect, and I'll show you how to give feedback in a moment. But you'll also see better tags, a header tag. You'll see a section tag. You will see section again. You'll see a lot more H1, H2, etc. Let's select something larger and generate this. And that's looking pretty good. Now we've got a nav tag. We've discovered what should be links here. So it has realized that these should be links within the nav. This is much better naming. Text, black, content, section, title. We're using H2s. So this is where you get the much higher quality code generation. We can also go over to React, and we could try some different formats as well, such as we can use styled components, which is pretty cool, and how it'll output well-named components for everything, container, nav item, etc. And then down below, you'll see how it creates these things. Logo is a style.image, nav is a style.div, etc., etc., etc. Or if you're a cool kid and use Tailwind, you could do it with Tailwind too. Now, the Tailwind generation is pretty good out of the box, even with the fast mode, but you'll see that we'll have much better semantic tags used throughout here, which is going to help you with Tailwind, etc. Now, if you want to turn that into your code and your code base, there are several different ways. One really cool way is to hit this button just to sync it to your code base. This will just generate out into your current project. I'll show you more on that maybe in a little bit. You can actually just publish this to your live site where you integrate our API to a region of your site and just publish it on through, which I can show you that in a minute as well. Or the easiest thing is just to copy and paste. So we can copy this and paste it into our code base. The thing is, though, like I mentioned, this you probably don't want to copy altogether. We probably want to copy this and call it like a header component. And we probably want to separately copy this and call it like a hero component. And so when we generate that and copy and paste, we will then have these as discrete components in our code base, and then we can use those and reuse those however we like. Now, the other cool thing here is we've got a hero component. This is really nice. But we want to make this more reusable. Usually you don't want content baked into your component. So that's where I would recommend using the chat functionality here to give feedback and iterate on what you have. So one cool one is we have some easy kind of click options or just type in freeform, whatever you want. I like this one, the one that says use props. And that will ask us to refactor this to use props and TypeScript to take in the dynamic areas and make this more reusable. So now we've got this called a sales component where it's taking the image as a string. We can give it feedback too and say, please make all text come from props with good names. And chat what we had, and then you'll see it here. So now it's taking the title, subtitle, and button text. And now we have a much more high quality component. You could feed in any additional feedback that you want. For example, maybe you don't like react.fc types. Again, as expected, just say it. When you're happy with the code, you can copy it and paste it into your code base and continue to make updates however you want. What's nice here too is you can do all these different chat prompts, but you can also go in and add these things as custom instructions. So an instruction is something that applies every time you do code output. No matter what, it will always be applied by default automatically. So I really like this use props one, or another cool one is use props and break into multiple components. This one is particularly nice if you have very large things. You know how I said like, hey, if you're doing this, there should probably multiple components. In certain cases of the AI, you can actually tell it to just generate multiple components for you here automatically. This works best when you have something relatively large, but we'll see. Let's try this again. Let's say break into multiple components. And there we go, it's doing better. So now for us, it automatically took this full design and said, great, we've got a header here, and we've got all that, we've got a form, and it'll break it all down for us. We can copy paste under code base. Here's what the total component has with the header and form separately, which is pretty cool. And then we can break those into our code base however we want. Let me check on the Q&A real quick. I'll show a couple other cool things, but I want to make sure we keep relevant to what everybody's looking at. Okay, one question that's kind of cool is how do we train our model? What data did we use? So I actually have a whole YouTube video on this. If you look me up on YouTube, I think I'm Steve8708 on YouTube. I actually did a whole breakdown video on how we train one of the specific models we used for this. The short answer is for the image detection, there's two things you really have to think about when training your own model. First one is what is the type of model you're going to use? In here, we explored various different options. One that can work well for something like detecting images is just a model, a type of model people use. Technically, it's a neural network, but the use case of it is object detection. You can use various services online to basically train your own object detection model, where all you need is two things with the model. First is the type, and second is lots of example data. Example data will come in the form of, for object detection, it'll come in the form of an image and then coordinates. So you have an image with 3 cats and you have coordinates representing the bounding box around each of the cats. And there you go. You could train a model if you have lots of example data. In our case, what you can do is find a public source of data to train on. So what we did, and I have a longer video on, is we used just the internet, and we actually used a headless browser to crawl the web to look up. What you can do is you can open up a website, take a screenshot of it, and that's your image. And then you can look up what the coordinates of all the images are. So when we have final HTML, the HTML code, we can look up the client rect, the get bounding client rect of each image, and that essentially generates training data. We have a screenshot of the page, we have bounding box representing all of the different images, and that becomes training data for an image detection model. We have a different type of model and different setup for the all responsiveness. I can go into that separately sometime, but I hope that's helpful. Let me show a couple things and I'll jump in and answer more questions. So you saw I took this page, that's cool and neato, or this top of a page, but we didn't have to just select one small thing. We can take whole pages at a time. So I'll go over here and I'll take this cool landing page. It's got all a bunch of interesting stuff in it, and I'm going to just hit generate code. This will run all that AI, and then it'll launch us into the Builder Visual Editor, where we can, again, make final tweaks. We can inspect it. We can modify it all we want. We're definitely not expecting to have 100% perfect output every time, but this looks quite nice. In this case, it figured out the padding quite nicely. The responsiveness is looking quite good, in my opinion. And actually, I don't have immediate areas that I see are obvious to correct. Now, that won't happen every time. There are some layouts that you'll try that just will not import well at all. Because remember, this is a model in beta. And I don't know if you ever used GPT-2 or even GPT-3 before 3.5. They were rough. They did not just work all the time. They worked sometimes, and then other times you're like, oh, this doesn't work well. Obviously, with GPT 3.5, GPT 4, the success goes up, and understanding what works better than not kind of is something that the more you use ChatGPT, you get a good kind of intuition around. But I want to call these thumb buttons up. Please always use these. These are not used specifically in training. These are used in as a measure of how well the models are doing. So one thing I do want to emphasize is none of your data is used in training. What that means is there's no case where you import something from your site, like, you know, here, Builder, or create custom landing pages in minutes, and then somebody else doesn't import, and somehow your text or your stuff ends up in theirs. That's actually not possible to happen the way we built and trained this model. It's a privacy security first training. But what that feedback button does is it tells us which version of the model is doing better. So when you use that feedback button and hit thumbs up or thumbs down, and especially the comments, they're actually all manually reviewed by a human. And what we do is we run tests of different variations of the model. And when one variation has higher feedback, we orient towards that. We make iterations off of that. So basically, by providing that reinforcement of thumbs up or thumbs down, that makes sure the model improves in the right direction. So here, like I said, we've got this entire page, and we can export nicely, really the whole contents of the page, which is quite nice. And again, to turn this into code, make any changes you want, and you can also just copy and paste it. So I've got a code base here that actually we can play around with, and I'll come in here and I'll take our home page. So let's look at this code base I have right now, localhost 3000. I think it's just it started as a default Next.js thing. I'm going to show you a little demo where we're using eBay's open source components to do something cool. But I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to paste this new component into my code base. So I have this landing page component that was generated using Tailwind. I think we have Tailwind connected in here. If we don't, do we have a Tailwind config? Oh my goodness, we don't. That's okay. Let's use a different styling format. We can use something else, or we can just try and add Tailwind. I'm trying to remember the easiest way to add Tailwind to a Next.js project after you've already set up the Next.js project. You know what? We're going to make our lives easier. We're just going to make a new one. I do not want to update this. CD desktop. That's npx create next app at latest. So we're just going to make a new app here and show bringing the code in here, and some of the ways I'd recommend you bring the code across. And keep in mind one thing. A lot of you joining are probably developers and want to use the CodeGen flow, but don't forget, everything I'm showing you here about importing and making responsive works with the Builder CMS. And I'll show you that flow too, where you can bring your designs in and just publish them. But here, I'm just going to say my project, I'll just call it my Next.js app. We are going to use, I like TypeScript very much. We're not going to use ESLint because it's going to be annoying to have it in this demo. Okay, cool. We've got Tailwind. Beautiful. Okay, so I've got my new Next.js project. I'll use a different project, the one I showed you, for another cool demo in a moment. Let's cd into, what do we call it? My app, my Next.js app. Cool. Let's launch into this in our code editor. And there we go. And inside of our app directory, we've got this page. So now I'm going to come back and I'm just going to paste that component that we just generated. And this should work with Tailwind and all that good stuff. The components, oops, I messed something up with my multiple cursors. Great. And I'm going to take the contents at home. I'm going to wipe them out, and I'm going to use landing page. Great. Now, again, we could have told the AI to refactor this to use different props. We could put this in a different file. We can break this up to multiple components and make it reusable. But let's just start with the basics right now. And we're going to go localhost 3000. It's probably running on 3001. No, where are we running? I think we didn't even start our server. One moment, please. And our dev. Cool. We're running on 3001. And there we go. Oops, I clearly broke something. I might have messed something up in my code export. Let's try one more time. And one thing to know is that the quality code output versus the fast code output. The quality code output is much higher quality, but it does run through an LLM. So mistakes do happen on that step sometimes. If you're having issues, one thing you can do is refresh. Now, there is a limited context window size. For free, we have it relatively small because we need to use a cheaper model for free accounts. Otherwise, we're just going to lose lots of money. For paid accounts, we use a larger context window, and we're even exploring making it even larger. But there are times where it just messes up, and you can try this refresh button to have it re-render. But because of the limited context window, sometimes it'll cut your design short. Sometimes for testing, it can help to test on fast mode. With fast mode, we get a much higher guarantee around accuracy. So here, I just have a component called my components. I'm going to use that my component, and I will, there we go. And I'll just use this. I don't need React imported twice. I don't need props because we're on TypeScript. And I'll enter this. Let's make sure no other issues. I don't know why it doesn't like div has no corresponding close tag. I don't know why it thinks that, but we can always add a new div if we need. Why don't pop back over here into Next.js app? There we go. So now we have it nice and perfect. This is exactly what was in our design, and nice and responsive and beautiful. Now, again, I would highly recommend making this to multiple components because it's a full page. Cut out the hero, cut out the other pieces, etc. And now if you use the fast code specifically, you're going to want to go back in and make sure you prioritize accessibility. So in this case, we generate all the styles for you. We generate all the layout, the hierarchy, the markup, the images. We will generate high quality images with source sets and all kinds of different sizes. You can just use these image URLs all you want. And all you need to do is go in and structure this the way that you want. For example, this should maybe be main. I'm going to be a little bit lazy here and not worry about the close tags. This, and you can inspect in your browser, potentially should be a section. And this should potentially be an H. In this case, I think this whole area is an H2. So again, we're using this as a way to get 80% of the way there. 50 to 80% is our goal. And then we're just going to massage the details, however meets our needs best, remembering SEO, accessibility, etc. And I would definitely recommend if you go for smaller pieces at a time where we don't have context window issues, like let's go back here and let's actually generate a new hero here. I'm going to use the quality code mode because this will give us a higher quality output than if we didn't. And again, we can copy, paste that across and use that. Now, a couple things that you might be thinking. One of it is, cool, we generate this stuff and we can copy and paste it, but getting it to production will still require a pull request, it will require a code review, and it will require a deployment to get that live. One thing that's really cool that you can do here is you can actually hook up an API that we provide. So we actually provide this tool that will actually integrate this for you. So I'm just going to revert this project back. Let's delete all that code I just generated. I'll get back to more questions on the code generation in a moment too. I don't know why my IDE is tripping out because I think this code is back to the normal, just Next.js default flow. But something you could do here that's really cool is we can say npm init builder.io at latest. When we do that, this will do a couple things, and you'll see why this is relevant in a moment. First, it's going to add an interesting little Builder DevTools plugin here, which will do some cool stuff. The second thing it's going to do is it's going to install dependencies. And then it's going to give us a way to connect our components from our code base to the Builder visual editor. What that'll allow us to do is, one, when we import, use the components in our code as part of the import. So as you maybe saw before, when I'm in here, it just generated a bunch of, nav and div and h1 and span and image, etc. But in a lot of cases, these buttons would come from your actual design system, your buttons. Maybe you're using Material UI, maybe Ant Design, maybe something lower level, or something that you created yourself. And so what we have coming up is the ability to actually use those. And I'll show you a demo of that in a moment. The second thing this gives you when you have the ability to connect to your components and work with them visually is it gives you the ability to generate brand new things with AI using your components, like an output to code or the API. The third thing it gives you is the ability to actually take these new designs, new updates, and ship them over an API without code being involved. Because I don't know if any of you have this problem, but certainly in my last job and currently here at Builder, we run into this all the time, though now we have a solution for it, is all the time people want to change their homepage. And most of the time you have components for that. And sometimes you don't. And if you hooked up a headless CMS with a schema, that works great until we want a new section, we need a new button, we need to change the color of this thing. And you're back to development cycles for really what should be trivial stuff. You'd think that, a marketer could just drag and drop and accomplish themselves. When we hook up the Builder API, we can actually make it so that the stuff is rendered dynamically from the API and changes can actually be made and published within your stack. And I'll show you that in a moment. But anyway, by adding the Builder DevTools, the last thing we do is we actually have a tool in here that can scan all of your components and figure out what components are available so that we can use them for those different options. Now, what I'm going to do is instead of actually going deeper in here where by installing the Builder DevTools, we got all those things I mentioned. Those all essentially come from this plugin. It works with Builder integration, works with pretty much any framework you're probably using. And we have the automated flow with a variety as well, the Builder DevTools version. But anyway, what I want to show you is actually what this looks like once you already have this connected, where you've got the plugin installed, you've had it scan your components to see what's available, and you can actually start working with them. So let's jump in here. And what's really cool is I have a clone of Zapier's live workspace, luckily with their permission. So this is what managing the homepage of Zapier.com looks like right now. This is a visual editor. So I can go in here and delete everything, and you can see Builder was integrated in between the header and footer of the homepage. All of these pieces are their components. We can edit these things and say, Wahoo, this is my hero. And these are literally just filling in the props of these components. I can go and see what the code looks like for this. And this literally is, let's just do the fast mode. This is their hero-centered component with these props. Right now, as I'm making edits, yay, I'm actually visually essentially filling out the props for these components and making this code. And then if I publish this, this will go live on the Zapier.com homepage. Now I'm using a clone of the space, so the Zapier.com homepage will not say yay if I hit publish there. But if you're in the actual Zapier space, yeah, hitting publish will make this go live. You can see on our docs how it works. It's quite cool. Now, why I want to show you this is twofold. when we have our components registered and we're able to use them, like here's some examples. We have this cool popular templates component we can just drop in. It's connected to data on the back end, different props to edit. For example, I could change the color here. We've got this FAQ section, and these are all things our dev tools can automatically find within your code base and let you visually work with, which is neat. I can fill in a new FAQ. Steve is super duper cool. And there you go. But what's interesting is when we start using our Figma import maps to these components and use generative AI also attached to these components. This is a really good solution for things like accessibility, where you already have the components, you already have the button logic to use the button tag, unless there's a URL, it may be used as an anchor tag. It has the button type option set and any other accessibility options that you need. I'll show you a couple cool things with this, but one thing you can do here is, let's go over here and let's go to, I have a couple cool Zapier designs over here. So one thing we could do, of course, is I showed you just clicking something and launching it to Builder, generating code. Another nice workflow that you can use if you already have content in Builder that you're kind of working with, assembling for either publishing or generating code, you can also use this really cool copy and paste designs option. So I could take this, again, this is a section with 0 responsiveness whatsoever, and I'm going to hit copy. I'm going to pop over here. I'm just going to paste it where I want, and there we go. Beautiful. We can grab that as code, we can publish it, we can do all that really, really cool stuff. Another cool thing we can do here, which I think is really neat, is we could generate something brand new. And so this is a feature that we do not have live currently, but it will come very soon, I hope in Q1 of next year. And we can do some really neat stuff here. So I tweeted a little teaser video of this, but soon you'll be able to actually take this integration. So again, we connect to the Builder dev tools, which scans your code to see what components are available, integrates the ability to set up this kind of visual preview, which is this is the Zapier site right now. We're actually previewing within it and dragging and dropping within it. It's visualizing your code. It's not like reproducing anything or copying anything. It's actually just re-rendering the site in real time with edits you've made to props. But anyway, I can go in here and say, make a homepage body about why Zapier loves Builder.io. And we could be as specific as we want, like use a centered hero layout up top, include some buttons to visit Builder.io, docs, and include a form for something. I don't know. And what's cool is because we have this awareness of your components through that integration, we can actually generate net new things. It could be a new component that's composition of the components you have. It can be a whole new page. And the way we envision this going, here we can see it streaming live. We can both see what's being produced. It's all on brand. It's using your components and design system. And we can see the code down here as well. So it added this hero centered. Cool. So it added a couple things for us. It added a hero centered with these various props. It linked to the Builder docs, and actually it knows the right docs. It actually knows that the /c/docs is the right URL, which is nice. And the sign up form. And we can go in and prompt it for anything. The world we envision here that we want is the ability for next time you have a ticket of make this page or whatever, if you have a design, you should be able to just go to the design, copy, and bring it in, including with your components. And I'll show you that in a minute. Or if you're just told, hey, we just need something, we don't even have a design. Well, we have this design system of components. Why don't we use it more? Why don't we design with that? Why don't we just speak to that and just make any changes we want? We also have ways to prompt and iterate too. So we can select an area, prompt it with something different, and have it rewrite as well. For example, use all caps for text. This actually might break this feature. Every once in a while is brittle, but we can see what it does. There we go, and it used all caps for text. Anyway, it's pretty cool stuff. But let me show you one other thing that's important, and then I want to rip through as many questions as I can. I probably didn't demo a whole bunch of stuff that we have already here. There's a million other interesting features, how to make your components interactive, click to sync to your code base, a lot of other cool stuff. Again, the AI models are in beta. They will, I hope, come to V1 in the coming months, probably a month or two, I hope, and they'll continue to get better. I don't know if you use GPT-1, but GPT-4 is a lot better than GPT-1, and ours will keep getting better too. With all that said, let's show you one other thing. So one really common thing people do is they have a design system in Figma. So you might have, I have a sort of a reproduction. So eBay has an open source set of React components for their design system. And I have a reproduction of some of the designs here where we have these button definitions with all these different variations. And then I have some designs. So I have this beautiful design here where I have used the button in Figma. This button has various props that we can use. So you can see we can pop in the icon, we can use the large style or the small style. And all these things map to props. These actually all are properties in Figma for us to use these design system components, and they're props in the code base. And so what I'm going to do, and I'll show you something really cool here, is because we use the eBay button component in Figma, this will map to the analogous component in React. And we can do that with whole compositions of components. But this is coming soon, and we actually have a private beta waitlist that you can sign up for. But I'm going to pop into this. Builder takes a second to launch here. There we go. Oh, this is, I'm running this in local dev mode, so that took a minute, but that should be okay. And now I'm going to import this. And I'm going to show you a couple cool things here. First thing is, okay, cool. So here, if I scroll to the bottom of the code or somewhere in the middle, there we go. So you'll see here, I don't know if you can see closely enough, that this eBay button is what we outputted. And with the correct props, priority equals primary, size equals medium, and just the minimal layout styles. So this might need a max width. This might need a self-align or a margin left or top. It'll only use the outer styling information, no inner styles, because it's using your component from your code. Now, one thing you'll see here, though, is, wait a second, where's the button? I don't see it. Well, that's because we're not connected to our dev server. So I actually have this an example using the eBay UI here. This was an old thing. So I have the builder integration where it could dynamically render out our components. And then I also have this button registered with builder. This is what our dev tool will generate for you automatically. So we have this eBay button available. Very cool. This is on localhost 3000. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to paste localhost 3000. This could be a one-time configuration. So this always use localhost 3000. And so let's enter it. And now this preview is running through our actual code. And there we go. We actually see the eBay button. Now I'm going to back up a notch here, and I'm going to remove this with 100% so that we make this layout work right. Again, small corrections are expected with the AI. We're going to get you as close as we can, and then it's up to you to get you all the way. And then very cool. This is actually using the eBay button. So that means hover states, empty states, and props are all valid. In fact, we can go in here and we can try changing the different props. Let's use the borderless variation. So we can use different children, Wahoo, different text. Again, this is all because we scanned your code. We're aware of all the different options here. I don't even know if Fluid does. Let's see. Doesn't seem to do anything obvious. Size, this should ideally be an enum, but we can make it small, medium, large. And that's pretty cool. Secondary, what does that look like? Haha, pretty neat. So this is actually using our design system components. And when we go over, I think we can do a preview, a draft here. Maybe we can. Maybe we can't. I probably broke something. Sorry, my local configuration, I'm always breaking. But this is a really, really key thing. What we'll have in the next couple months is the ability for when you have a design made up of your components, and then you want to produce code either through Builder and published over our APIs, or you want to do it because you just want the code output to use your product cells, your buttons, etc. That will all be connected. Under the hood, the way this works is we essentially do a mapping. So let's go to this component, and I'm going to go to the component definition, which is here. And then there's a secret way to see a new tab that'll come soon called the component tab. We are working on essentially an AI that will do this mapping automatically. So it'll look at your Figma components, it'll look at your React or whatever framework components, and do the mapping of which maps to which. eBay button on Figma becomes eBay button in React, and how the props match. Like some are easy, size equals size. So the size property in Figma becomes the size prop in React. But some are trickier. Like in this case, it's called style in the Figma, but it's called priority in React. And it can even get more advanced too. There are actually times where we actually need to have some not business logic, some basic logic here. So sometimes you find that children needs to map to props.title, or the Figma props, or you need size to be the Figma prop size .2 lowercase, because sometimes in Figma they use capital casing, but in React or whatever framework it's lowercase. But what's cool is our AI will generate all of this, and then you can customize it to whatever your liking is. So we're like, hey, here's how we think it all maps, and you can go in and say, oh no, this needs to be different, and you lock it all in. And now every import you do after that will use your entire set of components and output with those components. Okay, I talked a lot. I touched on a lot of little stuff. Let me go through some questions here because I appreciate everybody asking questions in the Q&A. I'll try and rip through as many as humanly possible. Okay, first question, Zachary Price, one of the highest voted ones. Are these sorted by highest voted? Yes, perfect. Question is, would love to get how to set up the linkage between, say, an Angular app and Figma to keep them both in sync. As a quick recap, that's kind of what I just showed you here. So Some of these features are coming soon. The basic features of builder connecting to your code and using your components and visualizing them, that already exists. The ability to make sure that when you import, that it's using the correct components, that is coming very, very soon. And one thing we are exploring is going the other direction. You have it in Builder and you make changes and you want to bring that back to Figma. Luckily, we have an open source project called Figma HTML that can take any HTML and wire it back to Figma. But beautifully, because we understand your Figma components and your code components, and because all data in Builder is just JSON data, we actually are able to map them back and we can actually produce a high quality design on the other side utilizing your components. So some of that exists, some of it is coming soon. Let me keep going down the list. Okay, so which features account for accessibility in the output, colors, contrast, sizes, keyboard only, etc. So one way to look at kind of how our AI works today, we're kind of starting at the top of simplicity and moving incrementally down in complexity. So what I mean by that is, at the end of the day, sometimes we get this comment on our AI features where front-end devs are like, oh, I guess I'm out of a job. That is so extremely far from the truth. If you've ever used ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot and just had to generate large swaths of code and didn't review it, didn't modify it, didn't even look at it, you would end up with a horribly buggy, broken, terrible application. The way these AI works is we like the metaphor, that's why I use it too, is as a copilot. So it's trying to automate a lot of what you normally had to do. What we can automate now is certain pieces of accessibility, semantic tags, higher quality class names, restructuring to meet good accessibility kind of tag structure practices. But when it comes to things like keyboard navigation, color and contrast, those are things you still want a human involved to review. Now, over time, we expect our AI and features to go deeper and deeper to help you with more and more complexity automatically. But today, when we did a poll recently, people spend huge amounts of time just transcribing layouts. Like, it's a crazy idea. Like, nobody writes PDFs by hand, right? That's silly. You can go to Chrome and export a page as a PDF, for example, or you can automatically convert in Adobe Illustrator to a PDF, but you never write it by hand. That's the first place where like, hey, it's a little bit crazy to me personally that we're still writing HTML, CSS by hand. We're actually writing the exact margins, the exact paddings, the exact borders for entire huge chunks of the UI. We want to automate that and let you just focus on the harder, more intricate parts that require development expertise. You don't need to be an expert developer to be able to just write margin 10 pixels and the child is a H1 and stuff like that. It does require more experience to understand the nuances of accessibility. And there's a lot of great tools. At the end of the day, we're generating code like you would have written, and all the tools you already use for assessing color and contrast and other things all will work as expected, and we encourage you to continue to use. And you can also customize the builder editor with automatic checks and warnings for things like this as well, which we can get into another time. Let's mark that as done. Just breakpoints. One question, is there a fluid text feature versus breakpoints? So we actually use both. We try to, by default, use layouts that are just automatically responsive all the way down and use breakpoints where you kind of would expect they might be needed. Like in the case of this, we have made it so that everything is actually fluid. The only breakpoint used is right there. So when we're going from a 3-column layout to a vertical layout, that's a breakpoint. But notice the header here. That's all fluid. That's 100%, no breakpoints involved. It's just fluid wrapping across. So we try and strike that balance there. It's a really good question. And we're always open to feedback. If you notice when you hit the thumbs up or thumbs down in Builder, you can type, send us feedback. Like I said, every single one of those pieces of feedback gets reviewed. It actually internally goes to a Slack channel where anybody who's on the engineering team or product team related to this product will read your feedback, and it actually becomes part of our ticket queue. We say, hey, this is a good point. The AI didn't do well here. Let's tweak the training and improve it for this. So definitely would encourage you to use that. There's also feedback buttons in the product in a few places too, like right here. So you can provide that feedback and continue to help us make sure we're doing the best for what you need. This is a great question. Jason says, from my experience, my designers don't always design to Figma with best practices, for instance, auto layout. How do you suggest designers learn to design to get accurate, guaranteed code outputs? So the goal of the project is to not need that. But there are times where you want very fine-tuned precision, and you might want to do it in Figma as opposed to in Builder. So to step back, in at least 80% of cases, we shouldn't need that. We shouldn't need someone to use auto layouts. And a workflow that might work well, because auto layout is pretty hard to learn. It is a very nuanced, it's a responsive design system, and that's tricky for people to learn. One workflow would be, don't worry about it. For instance, all these designs I imported today, they don't use auto layout. All the stuff that you saw, oops, I'm having trouble opening. Oh my goodness. I'm having trouble just opening Figma. There we go. When we go over and look at these designs, there's no auto layout used at all. Yet we were able to figure out all the layout constraints, etc. And if you want, yeah, Zach is saying easy raycast too. Raycast is pretty good, but sometimes it's a little bit annoying. It doesn't reset the state every time you launch it, which just throws me off. I'm used to something called Alfred, which does that. But anyway, all this stuff you see here didn't use auto layout at all. Now, a good trick, if your design team really doesn't know auto layout, is have a developer help out. Ultimately, a developer is involved in this process in one way or another in many cases. And so if the layout came in perfect, great. If not, Builder is just a thin abstraction over CSS Flex layouts. So you can always go in here and tweak and build or whatever you want. We got this layout pretty good. If we want to change anything, we can not only go into the specific kind of UIs here we have for the different layout, but if you're a developer, you can just scroll to the bottom and go to custom CSS properties. These are all the CSS properties used. You can add and remove CSS however you like to get the layout exact before it goes into your production code. Going through these answers quickly just because we have a lot of questions here. Let's see. Oh, this is a good question. Are there ways to help the AI understand functional elements, like how it should be had at different widths, or if a section is meant to have a variable number of similarly structured elements, just like grid or cards? So this is a great question. Some of Figma's auto layout features will allow you to do this. Another thing that I actually forgot to point out that's really cool is Figma does support variants. So here's all the variants on a button. And when I actually use one of these buttons and I choose the different options, it's basically choosing the different variants. So you see how it's mapping to these different choices or the different sizes you can see down here. One thing we have coming very soon that I forgot to mention is the ability to take a full component with variants and everything and be able to export that. So that becomes a React or Vue, et cetera, component with all the variations in it. So this would generate a button with props for size, style, type, et cetera. And you would get that component, that button where you can type in size equals whatever, and it'll resize and become a fully functional component as expected. That will be extremely helpful in cases where, hey, maybe you want to use Builder, maybe you want to use this code import, but you just don't have the components. Or any case where you have a robust design system, but you don't have those in code yet, we can just generate those for you. Again, a developer cleaning them up will be good to make sure they follow all the best practices of accessibility, et cetera. But this will definitely save you a ton of time and be able to give you a full, with prop definitions and everything, set of design system components by just clicking, importing, and tweaking to your liking. That, I think, will help situations like this a lot. And we're also working on ways to set additional metadata so that you can also kind of instruct the Figma design at the design level. Oh, this should be a button. This should be different things. So you saw me jump into those kind of advanced UIs. I'll pull them open here. But one thing we're thinking about doing is adding more options here. So when you go into these different settings, being able to specify deeper stuff. How will this in detail become responsive? What type of tag should we use? Should this be interactive with a click handler? We think we'll get deeper and deeper here to make the import more deterministic, more customized, et cetera. Okay, I'm taking too long on each question, so I'll try and go faster. This one's got a good bit of upvotes. I'm trying to scan for anything else with a lot of upvotes. Yes. Important question. How can you get access to the alphas and betas and help improve debugging them? Signing up for the private beta. And so I think Mike on our team could share that in the chat if he hasn't already. I can dig it up here as well. In fact, I will do that here in a moment. And I think we could follow up with that as well. If you signed up for the webinar, which you'd have to be in here, we can follow up with that because that'll be a key thing. And then you get to, we can only take so many people at a time and we try and work through the list and see who would be a really good fit. But then you can work with us directly. And what we do is we just test it out with you and get your feedback to make sure it met your needs. Okay, trying to dig through the most upvoted comments or questions. And remember, the Q&A feature is the best place to ask questions. The chat is a good one to just kind of share reactions, etc. Oh yeah, question I think I answered. Is there a way to use already existing components? We have an internal library of UI components. and I don't want to create them from scratch. We've got a spinner, a select, an input, a modal, etc. Yes, 100%. That's coming soon. The only requirement is you have to have something that represents those in Figma. So most people have these things like a spinner here in Figma. What we would do is we would use that in our design, and then the AI will map that and use your React components for those things. But that's the goal. I 100% agree. We don't want to generate things from scratch that we already have. And when our select, spinners, inputs, etc., are already accessible on brands, proper contrast, everything, we should be using those. So that'll come very soon, and stay tuned to that. You can follow us on various social platforms, and you should be able to see when the announcement's coming up. We might make a little thing of it. Let's see. I'm going to try and work through as many as these can. Again, based on the upvotes, I have about 5 minutes left. Now, don't forget, you can try this out yourself. You can give us feedback in those various feedback channels I showed in product, and we really love to see what you're creating and what you need. It's a beta product, it's brand new, and it's getting so much better all the time. Even if you tried this in the past, it's constantly getting better as well. Let's see. I'm going to go through a few more of these before we wrap up here. And definitely stay tuned for all the things we're going to be announcing. One thing I do want to show, if it wasn't sort of well understood, is the CMS side of things here too. Let's go back to the Zapier example. So remember I showed you how you can have Zapier.com's homepage, which is powered by Builder, and we can just drag and drop and produce things. Maybe we'll not use AI and we'll literally just add these things from scratch and start filling them in. Wahoo. This solves a lot of problems around when you have to have people who are not developers use your components to make new things. At my last job, we had constant needs from our marketing team that needed to just ship new things on the site. They had them all in designs, and we spent all this time coding them up. That's where hooking up the Builder API can replace the need for hard coding the stuff. So if you all use a headless CMS where you have to essentially hard code the layout and then allow things to be edited, the Builder integration generally is much simpler and more flexible. You can still constrain to only use your design system components. You know, wahoo, they're all responsive, they're all correct. We can add buttons as props here, changing the button types, my button, etc. And this allows your teams to not have to bug your developers, whether you're the developer or you're the people who need to bug the developer. Both sides are not usually so happy. And instead, you just do the integration, you start building things out, and we just publish it. And whatever is there goes live. That's something I definitely want to underscore because I think it's valuable for people to see, and it's worth trying out. And it's worth understanding. Builder as a platform is a visual development platform. We take your components and let you visually edit with them. Everything can be downloaded as code, like this component I built visually. Now here it is in full-on code. We can put in the code base. Or again, we publish it live. And you can see the way you integrate this to your site is very simple. You install our SDK, you place the Builder component wherever you want things to dynamically render, you make an API call, and you render the stuff dynamically. So think of it as a component composition that's dynamic as opposed to just kind of static, more simpler structured data. I'm gonna try and get through a couple more questions here really quickly. I appreciate all the really great and thought-provoking questions everyone's asking. I'm gonna try and go by most upvoted. Okay, here's one. If I change something in the Figma file after the code was already generated, can I regenerate just the changes somehow? Like a little code diff for just the changes? As of right now, that's a great question. As of right now, it's all essentially a fresh pass. So every time you generate, it'll generate it from scratch. Now, the good news though, is we do our best to make this as deterministic as possible. And one thing that we actually want to be able to do too here soon is the ability to resync those changes as diffs. So I appreciate that feedback. That is something we have, it's kind of in the works. Let's see. I think I got another question here that was almost the same as that. That's so funny. David asked what mouse I use. I've never seen someone grab a window borders on OSS and resize them to fluidly. I just use the Magic Trackpad. It's nice and big. It's kind of nice, but yeah, I like the trackpads personally as opposed to mice these days for Macs at least. Occasionally I regret it, but not always. Let's see. I'm trying to go to most. That's funny. That was one of the top upvoted one. Is Figma able to use Figma local variables? So here's what we use currently is we use, I'll show you. So let me see if I can pull in another design here. Oof, I'm not sure I'll be able to. Let's use, maybe I have one that I already imported just because of time. What do we got? What do we got? Okay. Let's take this. I have a feeling that at least part of this may use CSS variables. One moment, please. Let's just go plain HTML and CSS. And let me find one. In the builder designs, we actually do not use design tokens and variables much. Okay, here's one example. So anything that is a variable color inside of Figma, we will use in the code output. So here we're generating CSS variables, the builder off-white. This will, you can change the names of these all you want, but this will automatically use the color you have in your code and then fall back to this color here. So that's one example to see regarding us taking the Figma colors and the Figma palette and the Figma tokens you have and forwarding them as CSS variables. And we're looking into more ways to give you more precise control over that as well. Okay, I apologize, everybody. We are at time. I tried to get through as many as I could. I really enjoyed the session. I think we can definitely do another follow-up session. This one was definitely just a random ad hoc. Let me just demo lots of cool stuff. I hope you enjoyed it because at least you got to see some of the stuff, some of the best practices, some of the upcoming things. You know, in the limited time, we tried to touch on as much as we could and certainly answer as many questions as we can. Don't forget that you can always hop into our Discord and shoot questions there. Other people are generally around and hopefully able to answer some of them. You can always message me. I'm Steve878 on almost every platform. You can tweet at me. I refuse to use the name X for that app. Even still, you can tag me on LinkedIn, on a LinkedIn posts. I'm on YouTube, TikTok. TikTok's actually my favorite. Don't judge me. And I'm happy to help and see you be successful. And again, you can shoot your questions out on all those online platforms or just try it out yourself. We also have a great support team and we're always trying to make good docs. So if you're ever in our docs and you feel like a doc isn't answering your question, for instance, I'm going to do one thing here before I got to run. You can always go to builder.io/docs and use the docs search here. And let's search Figma. One doc I'd love to point you to is maximizing efficiencies with Builder's Figma plugin. I showed you several of these. These are some of the ways to get the best out of our Figma integration and get the most reliable code output. And you can always use the feedback buttons. If you're ever like, hey, I'm not getting answers out of our docs and you want to get feedback, you want to see improvements, we also review every single piece of feedback. This will just launch into Google Form, an anonymous form where you can fill out your info. And you can also provide your contact info. And in certain cases, when we need more information, we'll reach out, learn more, and figure out how to make the docs or product better. I appreciate how many people joined this. I really appreciate you all watching me just ramble. It's a lot of cool AI stuff. It's a lot of potential with this tech. There's infinite things to show, and it's hard to compress it into an hour. I'll continue to share videos and interesting tips on social media. We'll continue making the product better. Keep sending the feedback. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will catch you all in the future.